The Commissioner of the Department of Transportation is a pretty big job. Jeanette Sadakan has been Commissioner for 6 years. She was appointed in 2007. Listen to this department. A $2 billion budget, 4,700 employees, 6,300 miles of streets and highways, 800 bridges, 300,000 street signs, 12,000 stoplights, and 21 million passengers a year on the Staten Island Ferry. I mean, if you just managed that process, you would, and if you did it well, you'd probably be doing a great job. But on top of that, under her leadership and as a part of the mayor's leadership team, New York City has transformed the way people get around. And it's a more humane and a friendlier place now for pedestrians and bicycle riders and people who use public transit. In only 6 years, they created the Broadway Boulevard, just, you know, the simple solution of putting some green paint down and reclaiming space for pedestrians. 23 plazas, 285 miles of bike lanes. The Department of Transportation has won numerous awards for its new programs and innovations. And the most recent success, 3 weeks ago, New York City launched its bike share program, very cleverly called City Bike, a great sponsorship opportunity for Citibank, 3 weeks ago. And already in 3 weeks, 250,000 individual rides, totaling over 700,000 miles, which, by the way, is enough to circle the Earth 28 times. So things are happening here that are very exciting and changing, and the leadership that has provided that is going to speak to us now. Please welcome Jeanette Sadakan.
Well, good afternoon. It is great to be here to talk about some of the work that we are engaging in New York City. But before I get started, I always like to know how many people are from New York City that are here now? Okay, that's great. And how many of you have been to Times Square? Okay. And how many of you are members of the City Bike program? Okay, well, that's a pretty good start. So many of you are familiar with some of the work that we've done over the past 6 years. And I think one of the great things about this conference today is that when we think about the future of cities and we think about the future of the planet, what we realize is that all of us in the room here today are all in the business of designing cities. And the design of cities has a huge impact on how our cities function, whether they thrive or not, how we live in them. And I think that the lesson that we've really forged in New York City over the past 6 years is that it is possible to update and refocus transportation policies with a major emphasis on the design of streets, and it doesn't take decades to carry it out. And that the benefits that you get from a new approach go well beyond just going from point A to point B. So why think about the design of cities? There, turning it on. That helps. Great. We live in the urban century. We've got over half of the planet living in cities, and the UN estimates that the world's population is going to double in the next 40 years to 6.3 billion people. So the design of our cities is a key issue for our future. And for cities that are competing in the global marketplace, it's an issue of economic performance, and as we've seen with recent records, you know, this past year was the hottest for the planet on record. It's a key issue for the future of the planet. But unfortunately, the main design consideration that has come onto U.S. Streets and U.S. cities for the past 50 years has really been industrial design out of Detroit. And this has had a profound impact on how our communities function and our landscapes. And up until now, city planning was largely ceded to traffic engineering and traffic engineers. This is a picture in the 1950s of Times Square. And you can see that 90% of the people are crowded into 10% of the streetscape, and that really not much had changed 65 years later. This is another picture of Times Square. And really, the last time there was a major change to the streets of New York was really back in the 1950s when Manhattan major avenues were changed from two-way to one-way. And just to give you a perspective, that was back in the Eisenhower administration. And so the notion of leaving our streets, one of our most important capital assets, in suspended animation for 50 years is not a great business strategy. Our communities have been marked by really highway-scale spaces and with little thought to the buildings, with the people, and all of the activity that makes up a city. So our policy over the past 6 years under Mayor Bloomberg has been to bring more balance back to our streets and to bring planning and design disciplines back to the table, which a lot of traffic engineering had crowded out. And with this Plan YC initiative, the mayor wanted to ensure that our basic transportation systems had the capacity to grow and absorb new growth. As you probably heard from Amanda Burden, Plan YC projected that there would be 1 million more people in New York City over the next 25 years. And that meant we needed to change how things were done. We're not going to accommodate 1 million more people by double-decking the Brooklyn Bridge. We need to change the way our streets are organized. And we have a great foundation to build on. Because of our density and because of our extensive public transit system, New York City has, New Yorkers have 1/3 the carbon footprint of the average American. So as we like to say, if you really want to save the planet, you need to move to New York City. And we need to also, at the same time, do as much as we can to improve the quality of life and the efficiency of our streets. And the mayor really wanted to set an example of a new sustainability policy because he felt that this issue was largely ignored by national leaders in Washington. And as Bruce Katz always effectively states, you know, we're basically home alone when you think about the federal funding that's in place right now and the federal policies that are in place. Really the biggest federal policy that we have in transportation was building the interstate highway system. Check, we did that about 50 years ago. And so we need to have a new strategy that enables cities, which are the heart of our the country's GDP, to thrive. And so what we did is we translated the principles of Plan YC into a new approach to city streets that prioritized efficient travel, prioritized safe walking and biking, and prioritized using our streets and treating them as the valuable public spaces that they can be. These streets that can actually help us capture and multiply the huge economic value that walking and public transportation can deliver. So I think one of the greatest innovations that the New York City Department of Transportation has brought to the table has been the notion of transforming our streets virtually overnight, and that instead of wading through years of planning studies, we use paint and blocks and planters to redefine a street in very much close to real time. This is in Union Square. And the proof is in the real world performance. If a feature doesn't work out, it's easy to change. If you need to change a parking pattern, that's easy to do. And I think that New Yorkers were really tired of waiting decades to see change on their streets. You know, we're on our 4th groundbreaking of the 2nd Avenue subway. And so these projects really made the idea of a greater, greener New York, which is embodied in the mayor's Plan YC initiative, a tangible reality. And the business case and the quality of life case for this approach is clear. New York is really a walking contradiction when you think about it. We're a great walking city, and we have very few seats very few places to sit down. And in fact, you know, at any given time, you could see people just, you know, sort of posed on the fire hydrant, you know, families with children, you know, people walking around with heavy shopping bags. That is not the mark of a world-class city. And our business improvement districts had also been clamoring for more seating and more public space, because they understand the value associated with safer spaces and spaces that bring more foot traffic, because that obviously is good for business. And so we moved quickly so that these streets would be safer and that businesses could reap the benefits immediately. We started with small-scale plazas, and we also worked on larger-scale projects, like you see here in Times Square. And it allowed us, this approach allowed us to move much more quickly through the construction process. The construction process in New York City takes about 5 years to get a project done. So we would still be talking about the changes that we made in Times Square today if we'd followed the traditional route. And with the success that we've had, it's not a surprise that other cities are adopting this model. You can see this in San Francisco. You can see this approach in Chicago. You can see this approach even in smaller cities. This is Wichita, Kansas. And so people are using this model as a way to transform their cities overnight. And it's also being adopted on a global basis. This is in Buenos Aires. They actually downloaded the New York City DOT website, studied it for 6 months, and then moved forward with a plan. They even used the same epoxy gravel color that we use for our plazas and the double lines. And so you're seeing that everywhere across the globe, places like Buenos Aires, Mexico City, and in cities in Brazil. Over time, we follow these quick treatments with high-quality materials. Every single plaza goes through the construction program. This is the final design rendering for Times Square. We've already broke ground on the final design, so later this summer, you'll start to see the first output of this program. We have 54 plazas in the ground or in the design process right now. And so the design of our infrastructure really tells you how to use it. And in many cases, the design is a life or death difference for all users. And the design treatments that we brought to the city streets have led to the safest streets that New York City, last 5 years are the safest streets New York City has had in 100 years since we started keeping records in 1910. And we've worked very hard to re-engineer intersections and corridors that have above average crash histories, and designing streets that emphasize the visibility of all users, particularly pedestrians, and creating pedestrian refuge islands. The designs that we are doing also have a big impact on economic development. This is one of our first projects that we did over a weekend. It's in Dumbo. Since we finished that project and we measured the impacts over the last 3 years, we've seen that retail sales for businesses adjacent to the plaza have increased 172% since the project was implemented 3 years ago. And that's twice the growth of other parts in the same neighborhood. In Times Square, after we pedestrianized Broadway between 42nd and 47th Street, we saw an 11% increase in foot traffic. We saw safer streets. We saw retail and property values double. And Cushman and Wakefield found that Times Square is now one of the top 10 retail locations on the planet. And so really, Times Square, people didn't go to Times Square to see the traffic. People went to Times Square to see the crossroads of the world. And now we've created a place that they can really enjoy. And we've seen similar economic development benefits on other projects. This is one of our first, the first parking protected bike lane in the United States. It's on 9th Avenue. And retail sales increased there 50% in 3 years, twice the increase seen in other parts of the same neighborhood. We're doing this all over the city. This is in Union Square. You may have seen this project. It used to be lanes of traffic, 3 lanes of traffic there. We've created a new plaza. And you know, the design can tell you either this is a place where driving is the main activity, or this is a place that has a different message about the complex social and economic life that goes on in a city. And as you know, members of the administration, we work for a very data-driven mayor, and he's all about measuring the numbers, and so we have a lot of work that we do in that regard. Some of it's captured, some of it is not really, is more informal anecdotes. About a year ago, there was this plaza abuts the Apple store, and a robber was in there, grabbed an iPad, was running out through the plaza, and one of the plaza patrons actually picked up a chair and smashed the robber, stopped it in progress, and I've added that to my list of benefits of pedestrian plazas. So, you know, there's a lot of benefits associated with these kinds of projects. Every time we create a new public space, the space is used immediately. It's like a Star Trek episode, you know, cone it off. As soon as we cone it off, whoosh, you know, people seem to come out of nowhere. The plazas, interestingly, are all, you know, the business community has been asking and asking for this for years, and so all of these plazas are actually maintained by business improvement districts. And the mayor's made it a very specific plan, strategy that says we are only going to create public space where the space is going to be looked after, so we don't repeat the mistakes that were made in the 1980s when there weren't entities that were looking after these spaces and they turned into not very attractive spaces. And so the business community actually shows how much it values the public space by agreeing to maintain these given spaces. We've created 13 acres of new public space so far, and with another 13 acres in design. And this is on First Avenue. We are really working hard to design our streets so that they accommodate all users. You can see here there's a protected bike lane on the left. You can see the pedestrian island in the middle, making it much easier for seniors and kids to cross the street. They're our most vulnerable pedestrians. You see the 3 lanes of moving traffic and then the dedicated bus lane on the right-hand side. This used to be a tangle of traffic. It was really a utilitarian corridor. And in a lot of these corridors, what we find is if, you know, when you design other people back into the street, you transform it into a street that everybody is looking out for one another, instead of a street that basically sends a signal to a driver that says, you know, this street is, you know, this is your tarmac, you know, prepare for takeoff. And so it's brought much safer, much more livable streets across the city. This is another view of a parking protected bike lane that we put into Prospect Park West, also known as the world's most famous bike lane. We flipped the parking lane and the bike lane and used the parked cars to protect the cyclists, and it was an idea that I picked up from Copenhagen, where they had done it there, and it seemed very, very cost effective. Again, you can just do it with paint and move very, very quickly to improve the safety of a street and the mobility of a street. We're also using pedestrian plazas to create protected lanes. This is on Broadway. We've created a green boulevard that runs from 59th Street at Columbus Circle down to 14th Street, right in the heart of the city. And we're doing this all over town. These protected bike lanes and the almost 400 miles of bike lanes that we put down in the last 5.5 years have led to a doubling of cycling volumes. So it's a great testament to if you build it, they will come. We're also overhauling the design of our street furniture, which we think is a very important part of how a street looks and the performance of our streets. There are these new bus shelters that you can see here. We have off-board fare collection. We've also improved the branding of our buses. We have new bike parking. We have new bike racks through an international design competition so that our bike racks no longer look like exposed plumbing. And many of you may have seen the latest addition to our city streets, the City Bike sharing program, which we launched on Memorial Day, and it has been a big hit so far. It's the first new public transit system on the streets of New York in 75 years. And it puts 6,000 bikes into the hands of New Yorkers. And we have over 290,000 trips have been taken to date. People have ridden 790,000 miles. And we have 42,000 annual members. And again, that's in the first 3 weeks alone. So it's a great new option for getting around town. Most of the trips in New York City are under 2 miles, so it's a great new option for those short trips. We have 80,000 paying customers right now, and this is just day 23 of operation. So it's blown lots of records away. I think it really does speak to the hunger that New Yorkers have for these new transportation options. We've also designed these stations so that they fit into the suite of street furniture that we have. They're very attractive. They redesigned the docks and the bikes for that. And they also include a pedestrian wayfinding element so that people can, it's a brand new infrastructure, not only a cycling infrastructure, but also pedestrian infrastructure on the streets of New York. We did a survey and found that at any given time, 10% of New Yorkers are lost. You probably know this. And that's only the 10% that would admit it. So obviously no men answered the question. So we're working to address that, and we're going to have this new installations out not only throughout the city, but also incorporated into our bus and subway networks, which we think is going to be really key. So I just want to emphasize that we are very meticulous about keeping track of the data, the performance of our projects. All of our information is available online. If you're interested, I encourage you to check it out. And I think it really does show under the leadership of Mayor Bloomberg, it is possible to change the streets of a city in close to real time. Thank you.